Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
This is basically a transcription of the story two of my female cousins sent me. I'm paraphrasing in some places and trying to make it a bit more aesthetically pleasing read-wise. I'm not going to do the whole hokey, read this at your own risk thing, because this is /x/, and people are skeptics by nature, but real talk, this was 7 spooky 5 me. But they both live this, it's religion to them, and they were hesitant to even talk about anything they do, because the words are where the power is at. For those of you more wary, like myself, they both said if you repeat this story, you should eat honey or mint first, to make your words sweet. This story is two-parted. The first part is about my cousin Britini, who is the one I mentioned in last night's thread and is a conjure or a root doctor, and is involved in both Voodoo and Hoodoo, which are two different things, evidently. She basically told me that she wouldn't write out parts of the story and would only call me on the phone. Now that being said, like I said last night, she lives in the south in New Orleans, but around the time of Katrina, she stayed over in a town called Baker near Baton Rouge with my auntie, who was her teacher in Hoodoo. I'm not involved in their religion, but I go down to visit every now and again or call them up for some luck or advice on love. They used to have a little bookshop that sold regular books and normal Borders stuff, but it also sold all the weird cures and fetishes and candles for Voodoo and Hoodoo. Being that Voodoo, Christianity and Hoodoo are all mixed up. A lot of the black people down there participate in at least one or more. Britini said they did okay business, but she had another job at the Waffle House down in Baton Rouge as a waitress, and she used to get all types of people coming in drunk late at night. So one day she's doing a late shift and a group of people come in and sit down and order their food. They're all drunk, and so they're being loud like black people can be sometime. It's a cultural thing. She takes their order and eventually comes back with their food. When she comes back, one of the girls asks her if she hasn't seen her somewhere else. My cousin says she doesn't know, but it's a possibility, blah blah blah, and goes on about her business. As they finish up their meal, the girl calls her back over and says, "I know, you work over in that bookstore in Baker." Britini says, "Yes, I do." The girl says that she goes over there sometimes because she's interested in her Caribbean heritage and that they should hang out sometime and talk. So they exchange numbers, let's call her Jay, and the group leaves. Later that week, Brit and the group hooks back up and they all go out to drink together. As would be expected, they get really drunk and start asking her questions about Voodoo. She tells the usual and explains what it is and says it's not something she talks about casually because it's real to her and not something to play with. But they get drunk, and one of the guys, let's call him A for the sake of clarity, starts really prodding about it because he's Christian. And he says it's all demon shit and from Satan. So they get into an argument, and she tells him that he doesn't know anything about what he's talking about. He keeps badgering her and talking about how she can't really do anything but light candles and play with her blood, and eventually she gets mad. He tells him to prove it, and she tells him again that she doesn't play with stuff like that. So a few more days go past and she gets a call. The same people, A and J included, plus a few more, are all going to a party up in St. Francisville, which from what she told me is a ways north of Baton Rouge, and it's old school plantations and rich people. Some guy is having a party up there because his parents are out of town. He lives in a big ass remodeled plantation house, so they come pick her up and they drive out to the party. She says it was a normal house and a normal party. They get drunk, and then A goes out to the car. He comes back with a book bag. Inside the book bag is a Ouija board, a plain Milton Bradley one, and a bunch of candles. My cousin freaks out at this point in the story she just called me to tell me, and I could hear how messed up she was about it. She said that she instantly gets up and leaves. So Jay comes outside to the car and tells her that A is just being a douche and that it's not that serious. Britini tells her that they are making fun of her religion and who she is and playing with stuff that they don't know about, and that it's not some shit to even have a Ouija board. Jay says, "Well, I'm part of the same thing, and I don't know why you are acting like this about a toy." So Britini says she'll stay as long as they put that up, and that it doesn't touch her. So, in my opinion against her better judgment, they keep on partying. A keeps talking shit about the Ouija board, and the host of the party eventually gets wind, and they all decide they want to hold a seance. At this point, my cousin is too drunk to drive herself home, and she's basically begging them not to do it. But seeing as they are going to do it anyway, she doesn't want anyone to be bound down or have a spirit riding inside them. As a side note for those not familiar with Voodoo or Hoodoo, basically they have a pantheon of gods called Lua, and they all have a purpose or specific likes or dislikes and ways to summon them and send them away. They ride a person, which I guess would be the equal of being possessed. Most of the time they are represented by Christian saints, which stems from slavery when they weren't allowed to practice Voodoo. Hoodoo is more the spell work and the conjuring and making cures and jinxes and stuff like that. She says that, similar to how people in Catholic churches can get possessed by a demon or spirit or whatever, in practicing Voodoo or Hoodoo or Santeria, if you screw around with things you don't understand, you can get possessed by something you can't get away from, and it can even jinx your whole line and haunt your children and grandchildren. This is because Ouija boards in Hoodoo are considered to be a way to communicate with the dead. But to communicate with the dead, you're supposed to go through a Lua named Papa Legba, whose kind makes sure that your communications with the other world work out smooth as long as you pay him tribute before you do any kind of root work. As a side note, root work is what they call spellcraft or conjuring. So, she doesn't have any of the stuff that she would usually bring with her when communicating with the other side. There's a name for it she used that I can't remember, and I don't feel like trawling through our texts and stuff. But you're supposed to basically offer up tobacco or sweet rum or candy to Papa Legba and ask him to help you speak to the spirits and to guide you and basically not be an asshole. Note, all of these spirits are supposed to have two sides, good and not so good, and depending just on if they like you or not, then they can either help you or screw your life up. So she asks everybody at the party if they have any loose rolling tobacco and gets some rum that they had been drinking, and then basically builds a mini altar. She wouldn't tell me exactly what went on it, but I'm sure it's Googleable. Anyway, I'm not dumb enough to mess with spirits and Lua. I did get out of her that you have to chant and ask Papa Legba to open up the gates to the other side and to walk with you and let you speak the tongues of spirits, demons, and whatever else is out there. And if you don't do this, then the Ouija board will just pick up whatever is nearest to the area you're in. So while she's doing her thing, the asshole A starts chanting in behind her, joking around asking Legba to come and get on his knees and asking if he can talk to Jesus. This is a big mistake. So, most of the Lua are playful or obscene, and when they ride people, sometimes things get kinky. But you aren't supposed to talk to these entities with malice or to bait them, especially Legba, being that he's the gatekeeper and is supposed to defend and help you. So after A says this, she wants to stop the whole thing. But everybody at the party hears this deep thrumming sound coming out of speakers that had been set up for the party. Britini says that later, when she had time to think about it, she should have known what was going to go down because it was meant to be a joke from Legba. Like him saying, "You want the party to get started? Well, let's start the show." So the thrumming feedback goes away and everybody is spooked. They put regular music back on and some of the other people go off to dance, but their little group, Brit, A and J and a few others, including the host, end up going into the kitchen to finish. So now they all sit around this table, and some people are drinking, and some are just milling around, coming in and out of the kitchen. So she goes out the back door and gathers up some black earth and raids his pantry for some sage. She burns the sage and puts the earth on one of the corners of the board, that burns the sage and blows the smoke onto another corner and takes a swig of rum and spits it on the board. This is supposed to represent all the aspects of the physical world: air, fire, earth, and water. The alcohol is supposed to represent the fifth, spirit, and all of this is supposed to bind the board to do only what the Lua Legba allows it to do, and to bind him to the person that brought him forth. But she tells them to not take out any mirrors or really reflective things or take any pictures. They start asking some questions to the board. She tells them flat out, don't ask about what happens after death, don't ask about a bunch of other things, the list goes on. But especially don't talk about the devil or demons or doing any kind of harm of any kind to anyone. They all agree, and she pretty much just sits at the table and refuses to even touch the pointer. The host is the first person to grab at the pointer, and he starts talking about how he has Jesus in his heart, so he isn't scared of all this bullshit. and some other people laugh and they start asking questions. And the usual Ouija accusations of other people moving the thing, and Brit is kind of chilling out because she isn't getting the vibes that Legba is up to anything. Then, lo and behold, A decides to get involved. She says as soon as he touched the planchette, everybody else pulled their hand back like it was white hot, and that she started getting a sick feeling. Side note here, root workers all learn their spells from an older, more experienced root doctor. There are certain things that are usually the same for anyone doing hoodoo, but pretty much it's a personal thing where you work out how your own stuff works. My auntie had told her that all root workers develop a tell, which I guess is something like a tick or a certain feeling to know when something is coming through the gate. So continuing, she starts to feel queasy, which is her tell, and she literally jumps up and vomits her guts into the sink, and most of the people walk over her and try to help her. She gets a glass of water and turns around, and the host crouches down next to A, who is now sitting in the chain stock, still with his eyes wide open. She said she could feel Legba riding inside him, but that she could feel something bubbling up. When she explained it on the phone, she said basically that the LWA are gods unto themselves, and they can come into the physical world and use people as vessels, and that there are other Loe and spirits and things that wait on the gate to hit a ride on the unwary. But most times, if you were experienced and respectful, then nothing bad would happen because your Lua would protect you and keep the bad spirits away. She says that A leans over the board, unblinking, and starts moving the pointer across the board by himself. This is a bad thing because I don't think you're supposed to use a spirit board alone. So they still think it's a joke, but she on edge and still feeling something coming. So she's trying to read what the board is spelling out something, and to her it's gibberish. But then one of the Gullah girls covers up her mouth and says it's French, and that it's spelling out Jarive over and over and over again. So Brit is asking again and again for Legba to release A and be at peace. And it just keeps spelling out I arrive or I'm coming in French. So she starts asking him if he's Legba still, and the pointer goes to yes and then to no, and then starts spelling out Jarive again and again. So people are running out of the room to get other people and bring them back, because they assume A is messing around, but Jay keeps telling them that he doesn't even speak French, and alternating between that and telling A that it's not funny anymore, and he just starts rocking back and forth again. So now she just starts going through the house looking for the guy with the tobacco so she can try to make another offering to Legba and try to pacify him and unpiss him off. Meanwhile, in the kitchen he's sitting there doing the same thing. And she said all the people in the kitchen are just standing around, some laughing, some really scared, and some just interested, and he's just rocking back and forth, spelling out, I'm coming. She finally finds the guy, and she comes back in the kitchen, and she says, as she turns the corner, she could actually see Legba sitting there for a second looking at her with a sad face, and she heard him say in her heart, "You done this, girl, not me." So from what I understand, the guy starts speaking in tongues and then spelling something out on the board, which turns out to be Je suis là, I'm here. And then he slaps the planchette across the room. I kind of hunches over and leans back away from them, and then the wind outside starts to pick up, and it's screaming against the side of the house for a while, and half the people in the kitchen decided it's time to leave the room. So at this point, she's flat out terrified, and they're scrambling around trying to find the planchette. And some dude, let's call him V, decides he wants to take a picture of all of this and pulls out his camera phone. She immediately tells him now that it's super bad to even have a mirror in the same room, let alone to take pictures. Meanwhile, Jay is trying to talk to A, and he's babbling at her in what turns out to be French. The Geechee girl is trying to translate for them, and everybody at this point is super scared because he's basically sitting in the chair, eyes bucked and raving in French. So, after a while, they find out that the spirit is supposed to be the spirit of some French guy. She didn't give me a name or any dates, but I'm going to try to weasel them out of her. She did say that the guy claimed to have been a slave on the plantation, and that the last thing he had remembered was taking some food out of this kitchen to feed to his daughter. It was around this time that she realized that her tell hadn't gone away, and that her guts were still boiling. And then the guy starts asking who the other guy is. So the Gullah girl repeats it back to everybody else, and she says she doesn't know what he means and it doesn't make sense to her. The person kept saying in French that he didn't want to walk the veil, but he got dragged in. So they ask him how can that be if he keeps spelling to them that he was coming and that he was here. The spirit in A tells them that he didn't do any such thing, and he keeps saying it's the purple man. The purple man makes him feel uncomfortable and that he just wants to go back. At this point, the conversation just repeats itself for a few minutes from what Brit says because they can't figure out if the Gullah girl is mistranslating or if purple man is some kind of slang or if they just aren't understanding. Then she says the hair on the back of her neck stands up, and at the same time, A gets up and gets under the table and points over in the corner of the room. The Gullah girl says he's still gabbering about the purple man. In the corner, they only see the planchette that A had slapped on the table. Brit said she walked over to pick it up, and as soon as she touched it, she knew something was wrong because she felt her tell get much worse. The hairs on the back of her neck and up her arms turned into goose flesh, and A just starts screaming at the top of his lungs to the point that people outside the room come rushing in to see what the hell the matter is. The pointer is one of those cheap plastic ones, and it's cracked up the middle, and the glass eye also has a crack in it. At this point, she knows it's bad, because you are never supposed to destroy a planchette, especially when you're still actively using the spirit board. She walks back over to the table and tries to quiet down A and sits the planchette down on the table. The guy V walks over and picks it up and I guess is looking at the broken glass and pulls out his phone again and holds it up to take a picture of it, and he drops it on the ground again. He immediately says, "Oh my God, I saw something behind that thing. It's sitting right there on the board. I could see it through the camera." So at this point, she said she nopes out and doesn't want to mess around anymore. So she lights the tobacco and spits some rum on it. All the while, she's trying to get Legba to come back. People are messing around with the planchette, picking it up and looking through the lens, and they all claim they can see something that looks like a reddish-purple smudge of a man sitting on the table right on the board itself. So she can't get back into contact with Legba, so now she just tells everyone that they need to get rid of the board. V offers to burn it and she tells him off. They have to cut it into 8 pieces, 7 pieces for God, and then 1 extra because someone is riding the board and they can't shove it back on the other side without Legba or someone to help. So they try to get the board off the table, and nobody can lift it off the table. They can slide it up and down the length and width of the table, but they can't actually lift it up off the table. So V goes over to get a knife and tries to pry the board up by force and ends up cutting his hand and getting blood all over the table and the bottom of the board, and it falls off the table to the floor. Jay picks it up and tries to hand it to Brit, but she won't touch it. She just tells them to cut it into 8 pieces and give her a piece of it, and she sits out some tobacco. So they end up having to get kitchen shears and cut the board up. At this point, the party has pretty much all congregated in the kitchen or flat out left the house. She says that she knows at this point that they've screwed up and let something cross over the gate that they didn't mean to, and that all they can do is seal the gate behind it partially so that nothing else seeps through. From what I understand, these things work as one way in and one way out. The main reason that demons / haunts / spirits so forth are in our plane is because they've been conjured or unleashed or unbound by people who didn't know what the hell they were doing. And then that person either destroyed the way of sending them back, as in burning a spirit board, or just didn't realize they could send it back. Basically what she did was a half measure, because what they had done was allow a lua to open the veil, but not specify what exactly could and could not come through. She said she realized now that A had actually been in on the ritual from the beginning, because he spoke out of turn. She had only been a conduit, and because A was expecting to get a slave spirit, that's what they got. But because A was in control of their circle and didn't actually know what he was doing, he just kind of let whatever pass through, because rootwork and conjure is based on will and things like that. If you think negative thoughts, then that's what comes through. So after they cut the board up, she gives an offering to Legba and asks him to let the spirit in A cross back over and to bind up this purple man. And basically she gets the vibe that the spirit of the slave man is going to leave of his own volition. But that purple man is not going to just be a huckster out that simply. So she does some root work, which I'm not supposed to mention exactly because it involves our ancestors and it's considered disrespectful to talk about. But basically, she used the last piece as a fetish to encapsulate whatever the purple man was until she could talk to my auntie and figure out what it was and how to get rid of it. In the meantime, she had no clue what to do and said that she had pissed her pants because she never thought things would go this far. The people that had been in the kitchen were kind of stuck between half believing her and half thinking that this had all just been some big-ass show, which it basically had been. So they asked the host to give them a big lockbox, and they put all the stuff into the box and put it down in his basement in a root cellar. So A had fallen asleep under the table, and he woke up and just started crying. At this point, it's like 3 or 4 in the morning. He says he can't remember exactly what had happened that night from around the point of the thrumming, but in vague little snippets, but that he remembered some more things on the ride home. He described it to Brit as feeling something like having a waking nightmare, where you can see yourself in a dream doing something, but you can't actually control your body, and the harder you try, the more frantic you feel. And he said he felt like something was looking over his shoulder and brushing the back of his neck. They all end up going back to Jay's because nobody wants to sleep alone. Brit says all night people would keep telling each other to be quiet because they could hear doors opening and shutting or someone moving around. This is basically the end of that night. A bunch of stuff I'm leaving out because she asked me to or because it was just extraneous spooky stuff. This is actually the less frightening part of the story because it's obvious why these things are happening. And even though it's bordering on the spirit world, it's still following lines of logic and reason. So as a corollary to this story, my cousin got in a bunch of trouble for telling me this story. She just called me this morning about an hour ago and said she told my auntie that she had talked to me about the story. My auntie says that talking about stuff like this for a person like me is dangerous because these spirits ride in the ideas of themselves, and that the more a group of people believes in them, the more power it gives to their forms, which is kind of why things went down the way they did at the party. African slaves brought over their demons and gods and LDUA, and then everything got meshed together with Christianity and then became something new unto itself. She says that there is power in a story, and power in belief more than there is any power out there in the world of something that wants to get you. If you believe, then you've already opened the veil up for yourself. Which goes without saying was spooky, because I've been dreaming about this stuff, mostly because I'm telling these stories right before bed. Anyway, I just wanted to pass the message along to you guys. Auntie thinks I'm just telling this story to some friends from school. She doesn't know about 4chan or anything like that. So after that night, they half sleep because everyone is on edge and Brit feels like she's been doing something wrong and that she's put her friends in danger. A doesn't sleep all night, and he just paces and walks around all night keeping the others up because he feels like something is breathing down his neck. Jay is skeptical about the whole thing at this point, as are the other people that spent the night because they think it's all some kind of setup between Jay and Brit to scare the balls off of them. Brit ends up asking for Jay and another girl named Valerie to give a ride back to the bookshop so they can talk to my auntie and ask her what to do. They get to the shop, which has my auntie's apartment up over it, and they find out it's locked and Brit doesn't have her keys on her, so they have to go around the back and come up the back stairs that lead to the apartment part of the building. At this point, it's like 7 a.m. and the sun is just coming up. Brit says that she goes first. She walks up to the stairs and starts walking up, and that as she looks up, the shadows gathered up at the top of these stairs. So she kind of just keeps going up the stairs, and the shadows seem too thick as they walk through them, and they all can hear this deep thrumming that they later talk about and agree sounds like an erratic heartbeat. She gets up to the top of the stairs, and the girl Valerie almost knocks her off the second floor landing because she runs up the stairs and just grabs her and says she could feel the shadows touching her. So they knock on the door, and my other cousin Candace comes to the door, eventually half asleep, and asks what she's doing there at this time of the morning and gives Brit a hug. Candace, who I was on a group call with this morning and last night, says that as soon as she touched Brit, she felt sick to her stomach. They walk in the house and lock the door. Candace, who is a little older than all of us. I was 17 at the time and Brit is my age, so Candace had to be around 23 or 24 at the time. So she had been involved with hoodoo and goofering and things like that for a much longer time than Brit. She tells them that my auntie is sleeping at her boyfriend's house for the night and probably won't be back until the afternoon, but asks them what the problem is. They end up explaining the whole story to her, but they get interrupted by a phone call to Jay's cell phone. It's V who stayed with A, and he says that most of the other people ended up going to the Waffle House, and that only he and another 2 girls stayed behind because A was too tired and didn't want to eat and didn't want to go outside. They said that after everyone had left, they turned on the TV because they kept hearing weird noises from outside the house and then eventually from inside the house. They all ended up sitting there for a while when one of the girls asked V where A had gone. They see he's not in the living room with them anymore. So at first they think maybe he just went to the bathroom or to smoke a cig. After 15 minutes, they ended up going and checking the upstairs and downstairs bathroom, and he's not there. They look out in the backyard, where everybody usually smokes, and he's not there either. So V, who has been to Jay's house before, says there is a half bathroom down in the basement, and maybe A went down there. But nobody wants to go down there to check. So they argue about it for a while, and one of the girls says she'll go walk up the block and see if he walked to the gas station or something. She leaves V and the other girl in the house. This was all in about an hour's time span after Brit and the others had left the house, V says. So he decided he and the girl should check downstairs to make sure. So they turn on all the lights in the house and go down into the basement. The bathroom is cat's corner from the stair, so when they get to the bottom, they can see that there is a light on in the basement. So they go over to it and the door is locked. V says he kept trying to jiggle the handle, but it wouldn't work, so they start knocking, asking if A is okay. They get no response, so they try the handle again, and it opens this time, but there's not a soul in the bathroom. So now V freaks, and he and the girl turn around to run back up the stairs. And standing at the bottom of the stairs is A, just standing there looking at them. So V asks him what the hell is he doing and where he's been, and he doesn't say anything. So V starts walking toward A and gets halfway there and then stops, he says, because something in his guts told him it was something wrong. They both back up into the bathroom and lock the door. As soon as the door is locked, there's a knock on the door. They tell A to stop screwing around and once again get no response, so they call J. So they say that they are weirded out by A and are going to wait for him to go back upstairs and then boogie because he's acting weird. So Jay and Brit tell them to call the girl that walked to the gas station and to tell her to be careful when she comes back to the house. Candace says that this is weird because if she cut up the board and asked the spirit to be bound, then it should not be able to follow them around like that and that it should be held by the board. She says that they should just stay in the bathroom until they can get there and not to talk to A under any circumstances or listen to anything that he says to them. They say okay and hang up to call the other girl. Meanwhile, Candace and Brit get into a fight because Candace feels that they all are stupid as hell for playing around with serious stuff and then not knowing what they're doing and putting people in danger. Brit says that she knows it was dumb, but how was she supposed to know that it was going to turn out this bad? Candace grabs her keys to the store and tries to call her mum, but it goes straight to voicemail. So they just go down to the store and go into the storeroom to get herbs and candles and other things for an exorcism. Jay gets another call. It's from the girl who was walking to the store. She says she heard from V and the girl downstairs, and should she call the cops or something, or should she just wait? They tell her not to call the police unless A actually gets violent, and even then to call them first. So she ends up sitting out on the front porch and calling the people at the Waffle House and telling them what's going down. So now they finish up at the bookstore, and now they drive back to Jay's place to find people sitting outside on the porch. They say that eventually V and the girl opened the door, and nobody was inside, so they just booked it upstairs and left the house to find the other girl sitting on the porch. Not hide nor hair of A is to be found again. So they all end up sitting on the porch talking to the Waffle House people on the phone and filling them in until they get back to the house. So now they all are back together, but nobody can find A. They check the outside of the house and walk around the neighborhood, check the house again, and everybody sits in the living room, getting worried and debating just calling the cops. Valerie asks, why don't they just call his phone? So Jay dials his number and it goes straight to voicemail. Meanwhile, Brit goes into the kitchen to get a cup of water, and A is sitting at the table, naked. He's sitting there and eating something, and she doesn't know what it is, but she slowly backs out of the room and goes and gets the others and Candace. They come back to the kitchen, and he's still sitting there naked, eating what they realize is raw ground beef. So his face is smeared with raw burger meat, and he's just eating handfuls of it from one of those huge 10-pound things of ground beef. And most of the people are like, welp, time to go. Everybody other than Candace, Brit, V, Valerie, the girl that was in the basement with V, let's call her K, and another guy named Al, leave. They end up trying to talk to A, but he just makes faces at them and grins with a mouthful of meat. And when V tries to take the meat away, he jumps on V and tries to bite him in the face. So they all end up sitting in the kitchen and calling my auntie back to back until she finally answers the phone and asks them what the hell they want. They tell her the whole story, and she curses all of them out and tells them that it's their problem and that she can't deal with this kind of bullshit this early in the morning, and hangs up. So a few minutes go by and they realize that A is quiet in the pantry, and they ask him if he's okay, and he just starts crying and praying to Jesus and asking them to please let him out right now. At first they ignore him, but his voice gets frantic and he's screaming for them to open the door and banging on it and begging them to open it. Eventually they do, and he falls out backward. His face is scratched up. There's blood all over his hands and nails from him scratching up his own face, and he starts vomiting up all the ground beef he ate. Candace gets a call from my auntie saying that she's on her way from her boyfriend's house. All right, so they are there trying to calm A down, and he's fluctuating from being okay to sobbing and weeping to being extremely agitated and aggressive. All the while they are waiting, he keeps on crying and telling them that he's starving, but when they heat him up with some pizza, he throws it across the room. He tells them that he needs meat, and meat with the soul still in it to feed the soul in him. At this point, Valerie is freaking out, Jay is trying to placate him, and Britt is on the phone trying to tell my auntie how to get there. But she has to make a detour to the shop to get things first. She says it's probably going to be an hour before she gets there. V ends up calling his buddy Shawn to come over and help because A is literally too strong for him to control by himself, and he keeps ripping at his chest, raking with his nails, and they can't find his clothes. They don't specifically tell Shawn what's going on, they just tell him that they're having problems and need some extra muscle. He says he'll be over in 20 minutes. Now Britt gets off the phone and they're trying to calm down A, but he's going crazy, huddling in the corner, babbling to himself. He tries to eat the glass, vomited up ground beef and blood on the ground, so they end up having to sweep up and mop to keep him from hurting himself. He punches Valerie so hard in the side that later on, after the whole ordeal, she ended up going to the hospital because she had blood in her urine from a bruised kidney. So, about 30 minutes later, as they finish cleaning up and getting A calmed down some, they end up giving him a Valium. Shawn shows up. V asks him what took him so long, as he lives a couple blocks away and has a car. Shawn says that he had to finish up something at home and that he had been standing outside talking to Jay's neighbor. Jay says, "Which neighbor?" Shawn says, "Well, I don't know. He looked like he was standing outside your front gate when I pulled up. He asked me to bum him a cigarette." He says he thought at first the guy was homeless or a clucker, but that the way he talked, he sounded pretty educated. He had just shot the shit with him for a while, smoked some cigs, and then came inside. Jay looks at him like he's crazy and asks Shawn what makes him think that the guy was her neighbor. He says because they guys said it. When Shawn had asked him if he stayed close, the guy had told him that yes, and that he was always hanging around, so that he assumed Jay knew him. Jay asks, "Was it a younger guy?" Shawn says no, it was an older man, wearing a dirty old red FUBU hoodie and some dirty jeans. Jay says that both of her neighbors are women, and neither one has anyone staying there that's an old man, and that she's never even seen anyone like that in her neighborhood. Meanwhile, Valerie and V are in the kitchen with A, and he's begging them for something to eat, and he says that he needs it, or he's going to die. Then he starts moaning and wailing and begging them for some bloody meat. Shawn comes into the kitchen with Jay, Britt, and Candace, and they all just stand there as A is rocking back and forth, begging them and moaning. Then he starts clawing at his face. Now all they can do is put his him down. They end up getting some zip ties and zip tie his hands together so he'll stop scratching up his face and chest. He just sits on the floor in the kitchen, naked, covered in blood and crusted vomit, glaring and spitting at them, rolling his eyes back in his head and chanting about souls and blood and hunger. So Candace goes to grab some stuff for the medicine cabinet, and Britt calls my auntie back. Meanwhile, Shawn is in the kitchen with V and Valerie getting filled in on what the hell is going on. He ends up getting really pissed because he's scared shitless. He tells V that he could have told him what the hell was going on over the phone. And now he's here with all the bad vibes and shit, and what if it starts haunting him or whatever? Britt tells them that my auntie is right around the corner and that she's coming down the street right now, so this will all be cool soon. Shawn says cool, he's going to go out back and have another cig. Candace is coming into the kitchen with peroxide and cotton balls and such when A literally, keep in mind his hands are zip-tied together, jumps straight to his feet and makes a break for the back door, knocking Shawn down the stairs. Everybody runs out of the back door trying to grab him as he makes a beeline from the kitchen straight to the alley. Shawn jumps up and V is already right behind him before he can get to the alley. V grabs his arms and yanks him down to the ground and A starts kicking and biting. At this point, everyone but Shawn and V and A are standing in the doorway all the way up by the house. Brit says that when Shawn and V drag him back into the house, Shawn had this messed up look on his face. V puts A on the ground and puts his knee on his ass trying to keep him from struggling. Shawn just walks straight into the living room and sits down on the couch and puts his head in his hands. Candace asks him what's wrong. He says to them, "You didn't hear him? How the hell didn't you hear him?" Valerie asks him what. He says that A started trying to fight them, biting and kicking, but that he was whispering at them, "You'll know death is in me, and death is going to be in you too if you don't stop screwing with me. Know my name." Shawn says it didn't sound shit like A. He says it sounded like a gravelly, nasty voice just coming out of A's mouth. He said that he has never heard anything like it in his life. At this point, they hear my auntie knocking on the front door. Jay goes and lets her in, and she walks into the living room and just stands there and frowns. Brit says that my auntie's tell is that she can smell things like lwa, spirits and demons and rootwork, and that she gets a really strong scent when something is either good or bad, something like herbs and sweet food or tobacco for good spirits or good conjure, but a smell like shit and sulfur or urine or the smell of blood for bad spirits. They say she just looked at them and came in with her big carpet bag, sat it on the floor and went right over to Brit and put her hand on her shoulder. Candace says that she just kissed her on the forehead to say something to the effect of, "Child, I've been in some shit in my day, but this right here is an outhouse. You're going to pay big for whatever it is you've done." So at this point, V is calling for someone to come help him with A, so they all go back to the kitchen. So they go into the kitchen and Auntie tells Brit and Candace they need to start setting up an altar. She goes over and looks into A's eyes and at all the wounds and stuff like that. Brit said that he got really quiet and stopped raving while she was tending to him. She ended up bandaging him up. She told her to tell her back what had happened the night before, but to leave out the names of the Loire. So they tell her, and she pours peroxide on his clawed-up skin and just basically listens to the whole story and tends to him for a while, not saying much. Shawn and V say they're going out front to have a smoke and a break while A is calm. Brit says okay and starts helping Candace. So my auntie ends up untying him and asking him if he knows who he is. He seems much more lucid and okay than he just was. She asks Brit if they were doing any psychedelics or any mood-altering drugs, and Brit tells her none that she knows of. She says that he's giving off the stink of the grave and that she can feel something inside him, but that it's not a lua, and then it's not a spirit. Candace is putting out the offerings for Legba, and Auntie tells them they need to dim the lights down. She pulls out a crucifix and starts praying over A, asking Legba to come and be mediator and forgive any slight done against him, and that she offers up some sweet corn, tobacco, and candies. At that moment, Shawn and V come stumbling in the room, spooked as hell. They ended up telling them that they had been sitting on the front porch and just chilling and looking around. Shawn says that he had looked up at the building across from them and seen somebody standing in the top window. V had been looking at the same house, straight across from Jay's house, at some guy that was standing in between the houses. Shawn says to V, "That's the guy I think right there I was talking about." V says, "Yeah, I was just about to say that. What the hell is he doing in between the houses?" Shawn says, "What the hell are you talking about? He's at the top window." When they look back, the man on their side of the street leaned up against Shawn's car smoking a cigarette, just looking directly at them. So they stand up and start backing back inside the house. He takes the cig out of his mouth and just smiles and nods, waving the hand with the cigarette as if to say, "Yeah, go back into the house." As they're turning to go into the house, Shawn says he catches something moving in the bushes on the side of the porch, out of the corner of his eye. He looks over and doesn't see anything. But as they get to the door, they hear a deep thrumming sound, and Shawn says he swears he sees something moving around the bushes. So, at this point, Shawn and V are getting freaked out. Shawn wants to leave but can't because the guy is out of his car, and God knows what is outside. Brit says, Even my auntie was getting a little antsy at this point and tells them to stop talking about these things and sit down in the kitchen or living room and to close all the shades and to cover up all the mirrors. Candice says that they need to at least get a blanket for A. So Jay says she's going to run downstairs to get it. She opens the basement door, which is in the kitchen, and starts screaming. My auntie goes and grabs her and asks her what's wrong, and she says when she opened the door she saw somebody standing right at the top of the stairs, and she says she blinked and that it was at the bottom of the stairs looking up at her, and then just gone. This all took a few seconds, and she said she hadn't even seen a man. When they pressed her on it, she couldn't even describe what he looked like. She said, and I'm paraphrasing, it had been like the impression of a man standing there looking at her. Needless to say, Jay doesn't go down there. She's shaking and scared as hell now and crying because it's her house, and she's saying that she doesn't want to be here alone after they all leave and that she just wants to leave. My auntie tries to steady her and tells her it's going to be okay. She then goes on with asking Legba to come and mediate again. Once again, she apologizes for A's transgressions and asks him for guidance. At this point, everyone is in the kitchen watching here. Brit said that she didn't hear a door open or footsteps or anything, and neither did Candice. She says she just felt something telling her to look up from A and my auntie, and standing in the doorway to the kitchen was the man Shawn had described earlier, just leaning on the door frame. Brit screams, and Candice and Jay start backing up towards my auntie. Shawn and Valerie and V get in between the rest of them and the man. He just stands there smoking a cigarette looking at each of them. Brit says he was a clucker and that he was wearing a dingy red FUBU hoodie and some grimy black jeans with the knees ripped up, and you could see his ashy knees. He had to be about 40 or 50, and he had salt and pepper hair and a scraggly beard that was all nappy and had stuff in it. He looked like he lived on the streets, but she said she could tell just from the way he was standing that something was riding inside him. My auntie looks up at him and puts her hand over her mouth. He says to her, "You can stop calling me Mrs. Jarive, I ain't never left." So at this point, Valerie and V backs up and Shawn just backs up and sits down at the table. My auntie looks at the man just stunned, and he walks over to the table and picks up some of the candy and pops it into his mouth and then walks out of the room. At this point, Brit says they're all stunned and don't know what to say. But Candice says that A just stands up and walks out of the room right behind him. So they all follow A out of the room and find that the man is sitting on the far side of the living room in a chair, and A is standing up against the staircase just looking at him, quivering and snarling and spitting on the ground but not saying anything to him. The guy waves them into the room, and Candice says Shawn said something like, "Man, screw this noise, I'm out of here," and heads straight for the door and walks out and closes it behind him. After he leaves, V, Val, Brit, Candice and my auntie all walk into the room and stand and sit on the couch. Auntie says to the man, "Papa Legba, sir." He looks at A but says to her, "Yes, some missus, that would be me." The man goes on to tell them that he's going to help them a little bit, but that they shouldn't expect too much. He looks at Brit and she says she's feel her stomach just roiling and like she was going to throw up right there. He says, "Didn't I tell you, girl? Didn't I say you did this mess and not me?" Valerie and V just walk back into the kitchen, and Candice says she can hear Val saying the Lord's Prayer, and V is just laughing his ass off. My auntie asks, is it anything that she can get for Legba? And he says that she can get right with Bondi, but that's Brit's problem, as she's the one that reached into something that she shouldn't have and got her hands stung by bees she didn't know was there. Brit says she knows she did wrong, but she just doesn't know what she did, and that if she did, she would set it right. The man just laughs. Candice says that he never once took his eyes off of A, and that A just stood there rumbling and mumbling under his breath and scratching at himself. The man says that what they did was open up the veil for things that were lying dead on that plantation. My auntie interrupts him and asks, how do they know what's riding inside? This man is the truth. He tells her she knows the way, so she goes in her bag and gets some Everclear mixed up with cayenne and chili peppers and gives it to him. Candice said he downed the whole thing like it was water, and then kept on talking. Candice condenses the conversation for me, and she says that basically there are 4 different kinds of things in the spirit realm, or at least 4 main ones: Lua, ancestor spirits or spirits of the dead, demons, and then something like an anima or spirits of nature. The man basically tells them that what they had done was to open up the way in a place where a lot of deaths had happened for slaves. Back then, the slaves had prayed for salvation and hadn't gotten it, so the most abused of them had killed themselves at night, using their bodies and blood in rituals, and that some of them over the years had taken to worshipping a demon that had come to them and promised to save them in exchange for their worship. It had never happened, but, like a lot of people, most of the slaves had just kept on worshipping him. Eventually, the plantation had closed down and went into disrepair over the years and changed a couple hands, and all this was forgotten about. Candace says that the man finally looked over at Brit and said, "But the dirt don't forget. It just soaks up all those tears and all the blood and all the misery and bad things taking root in that kind of soil. You get what I'm saying to you, girl child?" As a side note on this, evidently the pepper thing is how Voodoo and Hoodoo people figure out if it's a real lua riding in the person. They either squeeze lemon juice in their eye or drink or eat really hot stuff without reacting to it, where a normal person would flinch. So, he tells them that this thing had been brooding and basically haunting this house for decades, and it had gotten more angry and more hungry until finally Brit had screwed up. So Britini says she finally realized it was because she used the dirt from outside, which was unclean earth. It had made a way for this demon to jump through the veil, and because A had been disrespecting the ritual with the spirit board, Legba had allowed this thing to jump into A and ride him. So at this point, the front door bangs back open. Shawn comes back in and his collar is all pulled out of shape, and he walks over by my auntie and everybody else looking scared as shit. He tells them that he had gone outside, got in his car and lit up a cigarette and pulled off. He had gotten halfway home when he just started feeling weird, like something was looking over his shoulder, so he pulled over and got out and looked in his back seat and didn't see anything. He had been getting back in the car when something had grabbed his collar and pulled on it hard as hell, enough to make him drop his cigarette. Something had whispered from his back seat, but he couldn't make out what it was saying, so he had parked his car and walked back to the house. The whole way he kept seeing things out of the corner of his eye and hearing this thrumming sound or hearing whispers. He had finally made it back to the house and wanted my auntie to tell him why the hell it was following him and what he had done. Because that was the language that a lot of slaves from the Caribbean were forced to learn. Voodoo comes from Haiti and Louisiana mostly, and because most people speak either Creole French or Patois or French. Also because from what I understand, Legba can speak any language, but he usually prefers Patois or French or Southern English, but don't quote me. So basically, the man tells Brit that she needs to pay tribute in blood and that they need to ask for the Loire Baron Samedi to help them and ask him to take the souls that the Purple Man demon has taken to make himself strong, and then they need to close the gate back up at the place that they opened it. If they don't, then there isn't anything that he can do, and that A will just get worse and worse, and that eventually he'll lose his mind and body to the madness of the Purple Man. Once again, this is all paraphrasing. This actually took place over a much greater amount of time, and by the time everything is said and done, it's around 5 o'clock and the sun is going down. J and V both start texting the host of the party and trying to get in contact with them. Brit said Shawn is scared as hell and is cussing out V for telling him to come over and get involved in this. Valerie is trying to talk to A, and pretty much Candace and my auntie are getting all of her things so that they can go and get the piece of the board. The man tells them that after the sacrifice has been made and they confront the demon, that they have to move it out of A and the spirit board and out of the soil of the house, otherwise it will just fester and basically haunt the plantation house. He tells them that the demon doesn't really have any personality, it just like tribute and blood and being worshipped, and that it would be perfectly happy to inhabit A till he dies. The only reason that it hasn't completely rode inside him is because they cut up the spirit board, and that he is bound to it for the most part during the daylight hours, but that during the night time he can have more influence, and that it will be much harder to push him to the other side of the veil. Once they've gotten him out of A, they need to bind his wounds up with clean linen, and then bath him in 4 thieves' vinegar, and that he can't speak. Basically, this will blind the demon because he would be able to get back inside him. They have to put rum, blood from Britain, and some of the dirt from the house into a green glass bottle. They have to take the last piece of the board and put it into the bottle, then take it to an abandoned house and leave it there. The demon will then be bound there and tethered to the bottle and the house. V and Valerie and Shawn walk to get his car. The rest of them finish packing up the bags while my auntie questions the man about what exactly they need to invoke and how it's going to work. He says that when they get there, they need to do it immediately because it's almost night, and having the demon at his center of power is going to make him hell on wheels. Brit said that the man said, "I'm keeping him from you right now. He's blind and deaf and doesn't know anything we say, but when I release him, it's your burden to bear." So Jay gets a text back from the host, and she ends up calling him on speakerphone. Britini says he's in hysterics because he had been sleeping with his girlfriend after the party, and he had looked up mid-stroke to see a dark purple shadow man sitting on the side of the bed watching them. Brit says that he had rolled off his girl onto the floor and that she had seen it too and started screaming. Then the thing had started to scream, and it had been the most horrible thing he had ever heard. He had packed up some clothes and things, and all the while he said he had heard a deep thrumming and the sound of things being shifted and moved around in his basement. As they had been leaving to get into his car to go to the motel where he was staying, he said his girl had heard something come running up the steps from the basement and out into the hallway behind them, and that they had just run to the car. They looked up and there was a shadow covering the whole back door, and you couldn't even see inside the house. He had waited for almost 20 minutes before he got the courage to go back up to the door and close and lock it, and even then he had heard something coming through the house at him. So before they leave, Legba walks to the kitchen and tells them that he's going to enjoy the rest of his tribute and get out of their hair. Candice says he just walked into the kitchen while they were packing up some stuff, and the rest were outside in the car. She and Brit go into the kitchen, the tobacco is gone, and so is the rest of the candy, and back door is sitting wide open, the guy nowhere to be seen. They lock Jay's back door and go out and get into A's car where V is driving, and A is on the third row of seats zip-tied to the seatbelt. They pull off and start the drive from Baker on up to St. Francisville. They said that was about an hour drive, and the darker it got and the closer it got, the more A was just going off. He would just sit in the back and hum to himself at first, then he started laughing and straining to get out of the zip ties. He leans up and whispers all kinds of vulgar things into Val's ear. Brit said toward the end they had to pull over, and Jay had to drive the rest of the way because V had to get back on the row with A and restrain him because he kept slamming his head into the side of the car and the glass window trying to break it. They finally get to the gas station, and they talk to the host of the party. He gives them the keys and asks Auntie if she thinks the thing might linger, because if they aren't going to get rid of it, he doesn't want to live there anymore and he's just going to move in with his grandmother. She says she hopes to get rid of anything that might harm him from the house, but she can't promise him anything. They drive up into St. Francisville, and they finally get to the house, and it seems pretty quiet. Candice says there are literally no sounds, like the quiet was creeping in on them. Brit says she almost threw up, and my auntie actually did because she said that the smell was like a rotting garbage pile. She could literally smell the misery and pain and suffering in the paint, and in the dirt and in the wood of the house, even though it had been remodeled and the whole area had been re-landscaped. They all felt like something bad and big was waiting on them, and it took A's screaming and bashing his head into the window to actually get them to pull him out and take him into the house. By this time, he's speaking in tongues and French and spitting on them, trying to bit them, calling V and Shawn Hoare's sons and saying that he's going to eat their genitals. Brit said it got so bad that Valerie started to cry, and that A screamed at Val that he would eat her corpse after he had tasted her blood and tears. So they walk up the stairs and open the door, and Britini says she can literally see how dense the shadows are inside the house, and that even though it's fairly chilly outside, it's steamy hot inside the house, and it feels oppressive, like something is pressing down on them. She said she expected the house to smell bad because it felt like it should. She said it reminded her of when you leave out something and it spoils in the sun inside a closed container, and it spoils and rots until it bulges out with gas, and then when you open it, it releases all that at once. They go through the kitchen and basically stand in the hallway debating how to go about this whole thing. My auntie wants to do the ritual in the basement, but Shawn says screw that. If that's the case, he can go wait in the car. Brit says that she really doesn't want to do that, but she told my auntie if that's what they had to do, so be it. Meanwhile, A is going absolutely wild, and it's taking its toll on V, and he ends up punching him in the mouth after A bites him. A then goes on to spit blood into Val and V's faces and then throw the blanket off himself that they had wrapped him in and starts to piss on the floor in the hall, sneering at my auntie. They open the door and all 8 of them, Shawn and V, frog marching A, go down into the basement. It's a nice finished basement on the first level, but then off to the side there's a root cellar where they had put the iron lockbox. Brit goes and gets the box out of the root cellar while Candace and my auntie set out the stuff they need to summon Baron Samedi. They go around covering up mirrors, and then they set up a small altar, and Auntie starts invoking Legba to allow them to speak to Samedi. They put out offerings to both Loire. But before they can do anything, they hear something running from what Candace said was the top of the stairs on the main floor, down the hallway, and then the door slams shut so hard that it makes the door frame rattle. Then the air just starts to feel heavy, and Brit swears that she can smell a sickly, sweet smell, like someone with diabetes with an open, wet wound, or like somebody's breath on their sickbed. All of a sudden, Shawn stands up stock straight like he's getting electrocuted and then relaxes. He reaches over onto the altar and grabs the Swisher Sweet they were using as an offering and walks over to Candace and tells her he loves round brown things. Candace backs up from him, like what the hell is going on? But my auntie gets between them and says, "Baron Samedi, be welcome unto this house." Brit says that the voice coming out of Shawn's mouth was musical and that he wouldn't stand still. He just kept pacing back and forth like a panther, smiling at them and smoking on his swisher. He nods at my auntie and gives her a mock bow and then sits on the floor Indian style and starts checking out Candace again. Samedi Shawn tells them to tell him a funny joke and that if they don't wise up quickly, they are all gonna die. At this point, Valerie is sitting on the couch praying. V is sitting next to her, and A has retreated to a corner of the basement and is crouched down like a cornered animal, eyes darting all around the room, sucking on his own bloody fingers and hands. My auntie says, "Okay, if that's what you need, but we need you to make sure that all the souls in the place rest in peace and go where they are supposed to go." Candace, Brit and my auntie end up conferring, trying to figure out who can tell the best raunchy joke. V gets pissed and says that he thought this was supposed to be serious and that this is some bullshit and that they are wasting time. Brit nor Candace saw Shawn get up, but they say he was up in V's face, pushing him back into the corner where A was still mumbling and laughing and crying. He says to V,
"You haven't learned to watch your mouth, have you? Learn from your buddy over there or I can just about leave right now."
So, they end up using Candace's joke, and Samedi accepts it. He tells them that they need to move quickly because he can't protect them like Legba can, as he has no power over the demon, only with the souls that aren't resting in the plantation. So he tells them that they need to cut Brit's palm and say the Lord's Prayer and pray to Bondi and ask him for forgiveness for their trespass. They then have to fill a bottle with alcohol, spirits and blood and then burn the piece of the spirit board. Brit asks him isn't that a bad idea, but he says because she's basically bound the spirit to the house and to the board and inside, the only way to release it is to throw the door all the way open for a time, and that basically they had wedged a door open, and that things could come in and out in this place as they wanted, and then Legba can close it again all the way. He says that while the burning is happening, and until the demon is sealed up in his new home, that he'll be completely untethered and unbridled, and that he will and can try to do harm to them, but that as long as they seal it up and send him back, then he will leave this house. So they end up debating if they can actually go through with this plan. Meanwhile, Samedi is soft-shoeing around the room, checking out Val and sneering and making faces and giving the finger to A. Finally, they decided that it's the only option they have. Brit goes upstairs to get a knife. She says when she gets to the top of the stairs, she can literally hear nothing but whispers, like a room full of people talking and whispering right up under her. She walks over into the kitchen, but the back door is open, and through it she can see the doorway is and back porch if just filled with shadows, and she can't even see the car from door. What she can see is big white eyes, and she says she doesn't actually see them all the way, but the impression of about 5 different sets of eyes just following her as she walks across the room. As soon as she touches the knife in the knife block, the whole kitchen thumps, and the whispers get louder like they're coming in from the door. She looks out the windows, and it's the same thing as the door. It's like she can feel people looking in from outside watching her, and she gets a sick feeling in her guts. She starts walking back to the steps, and she says she can feel the whispers and voices and eyes following her. She gets to the stairs and heads back down, and the back door slams so hard that it rattles the glass cabinets in the kitchen. She almost falls down the stairs, but she caught herself on the railing, and she said she felt like something was actually heavy on her back, trying to push her down the stairs. She gets down to the bottom and turns to Samedi, who is just smiling and laughing, and asks him what to do. He tells her to cut her palm and mix it with the alcohol, then say the Lord's Prayer, and then pour part of the alcohol onto the piece of the spirit board and set fire to it. After that, she had to press her palm against A's forehead, and then cull the demon out of him and into her own blood, and then use her palm to snuff out the flame of the burning spirit board. Candace said they had all been paying attention to Shawn, and that, when she turned, A was crouched up against the wall on his hands and knees, and that the whole corner was just full of shadow stuff. She had backed away, and it started cursing and throwing insults at them all, spitting blood and howling, and then Brit started the ritual. A loses his mind, and they both say that it's wailing so loud that all the sounds are melding into each other. Shawn is just standing next to Brit, his arms outstretched in supplication, his eyes rolled back in his head as he rocks back and forth, and this low, undulating chat is coming from deep down in his chest. A starts to crawl across the room, his belly flat against the floor, and Britini cuts her palm and dribbles the blood into the alcohol. My auntie is praying and beating a rhythm on a small drum. Val has backed up next to V, and they're just both standing there praying. It sounds like a big wind comes down the stairs, and Brit takes some of the alcohol into her mouth, spits it onto the spirit board. And the Elwee riding inside Shawn throws his cigarillo onto it, and it instantly catches on fire. A's back arches, and he lets out a cry like a stepped-on catch, and it gets higher and higher until it's so loud Candace says she just covers up her ears. A launches himself at Brit, gnashing his teeth, trying to bite her throat out and calling her names, and moaning about blood and about sacrifice and the price of blood. And things are just going nuts. A's clawing at her and still moaning and screaming and rambling, and they're fighting on the floor. He ends up biting her so hard on her upper arm she needed 14 stitches, and he ripped out 3 of her braids. Finally, she rolls him over and pins his arms back and presses her palm to his forehead and starts to pray again, asking for the Elwee and Samedi to let the spirits rest and to let A be clean and whole again, to put the demon into her and let it ride in her. A goes limp after a while, and Brit says she doesn't even remember any of this part, but Candace says that she stands up over A and just sort of rocks back and forth, rumbling under her breath, and then Shawn goes over and touches her. She jerks away at first, and it looks like she's going to take off and run, but he puts a hand on her other shoulder and says, "You done your part, girl. Now finish it." Grabs her left breast and squeezes it and then goes completely slack, just like A did. Brit walks like a sleepwalker to the still burning spirit board and puts it out with her palm, and Candace says you can hear the blood sizzle and cook from the fire. She picks up the remains of it and stuffs it into the bottle. This hocks and spits into the bottle and corks it and sits down on the ground. My auntie goes over to her and lifts up her eyelids, and her pupils were so dilated that there was only a brown ring of iris around them. They end up sitting down in the basement for over an hour because Shawn nor Brit nor A will wake up. When they do, A is the first one to wake up, and he's in a panic and doesn't remember shit that's happened since the night before. All he can remember is seeing a face staring right into his eyes and grinning really big, and then just a dark purple like the night sky, and people screaming and crying, and then nothing. V takes him upstairs to borrow some of the host guy's clothes, and he breaks down too. Shawn is a little bit freaked out, but fairly okay, and he says he just wants to go home. My auntie eventually wakes up Brit because in order to finish the ritual, they have to take the bottle and bury it in an abandoned home and leave it there, and that after a year the demon will go back to the other side of the spirit veil. Candace and my auntie end up having to get Val to help them carry her upstairs because she's so tired and weak. They end up finding a house out in the boondocks of Baker, and they bury the bottle under the back porch of the house, and they would go back every so often to say the Lord's Prayer over it. Later that year, though, Katrina happened, so they kind of lost track of it and went back later, and found out that the whole house had been torn down. By the storm, Brit and all of them still have dreams about the Purple Man sometimes, and they try to not talk about it or bring it up.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentexts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.